a non-negotiable ban as seen by Texas state officials from March to April 2020. This ban was infringement upon citizens' rights to an abortion prior to viability of a fetus, as seen in the Roe v. Wade decision. So, as we can see in this current abortion scenario, Texas citizens were extremely angered at the extremist ban that was set, infringing upon the constitutional right of the Roe v. Wade decision. So, furthermore, outweighing the proportion of the decision to create a ban, it may need some sort of leeway in order to be effective. So, following proportionality is necessity. So, we can ask ourselves, is the action necessary to override the conflicting ethical claims to achieve the public health goal? So, the action to ban non-medically necessary abortions necessary. And in this case, bans were proven to decrease by 38%, while past the ban, there was a spike of up to 82% of an increase in abortions, which can help us identify that after a large increase of 44%, may be necessary steps to reducing the amount of abortions that are not medically necessary. And next is least infringement. So is the action the least restrictive and least intrusive? So by finding a common ground, such as acknowledging the constitutional right to an abortion prior to viability, and then instating a ban past a specific time frame, we may find this to be the least restrictive and least intrusive goal to public health, abortions. And following this is public justification. So can public health officials offer public justification that citizens, and in particular, those most affected, could find acceptable in principle? While there are many that are in favor of pro-ban and others that are in favor of pro-abortion, there is also a proposal to identify the substantial intermediate group of what they like to call situationists. And this can help alter the mindset of pro-one side versus pro-other. So by understanding and identifying this middle group, which acknowledges both sides, the issue of abortion and the issue of the ban at hand may become more decisive. In fact, regarding the topic of abortion, Smith and Son documented that only about 8% of Americans would fall under an absolute pro-life position, and approximately 31% would fall under an absolute pro-choice, while the majority of Americans fell somewhere in between. Finding a give and take from one side versus the other, we would be able to not only acknowledge the benefit to those affected, but the remaining society as well. And to acknowledge both sides is to see that there is justification to an increase in saved lives, as far as unborn babies in the case of an abortion. But there's also a justification to the constitutional right made to the individual found in the Roe v. Wade decision. So by adjusting the concept of a ban and rather creating limitations to abortions that are not medically necessary, there may be an ability to gain a common ground between the pro-choice beliefs and pro-life beliefs. And finally, we would question the impartiality. So are all potentially affected stakeholders treated impartially? So in the case of the ban, Texans potentially seeking an abortion during March 22nd, 2020 and April 21st, 2020 could have been stripped of their overall right to an abortion, as the time frame for a decision could have surpassed the viability stages. So due to the rush following the ban and the numbers gathered from that time frame, these women could have been impartially affected, specifically by the ban. Therefore, a way to ensure that the affected are not pinpointed is to give rights to both pro-life supporters and pro-choice supporters, rather than pinpointing or selecting only one side. The next ethical regard to consider are general moral considerations. So the first 5 general moral considerations are producing benefits, avoiding, preventing, and removing harms, utility, distributive justice, procedural justice, and respect of autonomous choices and actions, including liberty of action. So by reviewing the first general moral consideration of producing benefits, we can immediately identify a potential fault in this matter. For example, while a benefit may be to a mother's financial security or life choices, there is a baby that is termed prior to having a chance at life. So as a public health advocate, we can ultimately advise the community of options regarding financial assistance in these cases, or even adoption choices instead. Doing so, we can productively identify an alternative to abortion, which would ultimately save an unborn baby's life, or we could give another option that could still assist the mother in her needs as well. Regarding the next general moral consideration of avoiding, preventing, and removing harms, we can again identify that unfortunately with the unborn baby, there is no way to avoid, prevent, or remove harms after the abortion has been done. And therefore, the only available option is going to be avoiding, preventing, and removing harms to the mother of the unborn child. So there are certain considerations to be taken when there is less harm being done to the individual wishing to receive the abortion. And while many argue that the act can be safely performed, when it is supported throughout Western medicine, it is hard to identify exactly the truth in the matter when the abortion mortality surveillance system and the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, or ICD, quote unquote, cannot accurately gather information of recorded deaths due to abortions because there may not be proper documentation, as it is not mandated to document that information. The next general moral consideration to explore is the concept of producing the maximum balance of benefits over harms and other costs in relation to abortions, which is also commonly referred to as utility. So the criteria related to abortion relates to utility in its objective to maintain a better life for the mother. However, this moral consideration doesn't necessarily pertain, yet again, to the objective of the child's life, as it is not considered whatsoever. This goes back to the ideal that the physical, mental, social, emotional, and ethical complications that result from abortion have a utility of burden on an individual and societal impacts as well. The general moral consideration of distributive justice or procedural justice in respect to abortion is regarded primarily due to its procedural justice. So distributive justice implies that there is an accurate distribution of burdens and benefits, while procedural justice indicates an assurance of public participation. Distributive justice plays a role in abortion in the form of societal impact. While many can agree with an individual's rights in this manner, there is a greater impact in one's physical, mental, and emotional well-being amongst society and themselves. However, procedural justice definitely pertains to abortion because it falls under the recourse of having the right to one's body, which means that all decisions regarding your body fall under the discretion of your authority and only your authority, unless you choose to assign such authority to someone else. And we can also see this per Maguire's quotations as well. The last general moral consideration is respect of autonomous choices and actions when examining abortion. So when the time comes to consider an abortion, many do look towards the Roe versus Wade decision that ruled to protect a woman's rights and liberty to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restrictions. Unfortunately, while a baby is not considered to have the autonomous choices, the mother does in this case have an autonomous choice and liberty of action to get an abortion herself. Next ethical consideration that we as public health officials can look towards is QALY, or quality adjusted life year. And one of the most important arguments from the standpoint of a pro-choice belief is that there's this permissibility of fetuses, as they are usually seen as not really being people or considered in the QALY realm. So when it is arguably looked at in regard to the principle of utility, abortion directly correlates in the concept of a fetus being a true human life. So as we see here at the bottom, if aborting one child would save a million others, most public health officials would probably endorse the abortion, but that is indeed not the case, as the quality adjusted life year actually makes the numbers go down as the amount of abortions go up. As we can see here, if the life of the unborn baby was equally as important as the mother's, it would be in equal favor to the calculation of QALY. By correlating our abortion scenario to our QALY calculation, it would be advised that pro-life would matter in the case of calculation. So after gathering all of our data, we want to finally recall history. So recall everything we went over, consider the pros and cons, and come to our ultimate conclusion. So recalling the history from the Texas ban, there was a decrease in the number of abortions when the ban was initiated. And in the lift of that ban, there was a 44% increase. Helps us to acknowledge that in the case of non-medical emergencies, abortions be sought for undesirable timing or financial obligations. And in these cases, it would be our job as public health officials to consider readily available education to resources such as welfare, adoption, counseling, and considerable safe zones such as WIC, maintain consideration for abortions when necessary, especially in regards to existential circumstances. Creating limitations and maintaining a middle ground, precatory conditions, GMOs, QALY, and consideration of history help us to identify a conclusion in even our most recent abortion scenario in Texas. Obtaining all of our evidence, the most ethical conclusion is to save the lives of unborn babies, as we can offer positive alternatives to abortion after the stage of viability. Provide solutions to relationship dilemmas, financial obligations, and adoption. Maintains the constitutional right based off of the Roe versus Wade agreement. To support Roe versus Wade, there will be considerable options for abortion as necessary, including rape, abuse, or medically diagnosed mental illness or other chronic health issues as well.